The Weight of Mornings. Chapter 1. Before the light comes. The alarm did not wake him. It never did anymore. Eddie was already sitting on the edge of the bed at 447 in the morning. His bare feet resting flat against the cold floor, listening to the house breathe around him. The radiator clicked and settled. A car passed somewhere on the far end of the street, its headlights sliding briefly across the ceiling, like a pale hand reaching and then withdrawing. Somewhere in the walls, a pipe groaned the old building, stretching itself awake, the way old things do. He sat there for a long moment, not thinking about anything in particular. This was the part of the morning he had never told anyone about. Not his daughter Freya, who called every Sunday from Bristol, and asked if he was sleeping well. Not his neighbor Stella, who left soup on his doorstep, every so often with a note that said heated on the stove. Not the microwave, you know why. Not the men at the bakery, who arrived each morning, bleary-eyed and smelling of flour, and talked about football, and never asked about anything that required a real answer. This was his. The 4 minutes between waking and rising. The darkness. The floor beneath his feet. He pressed down with his toes, feeling the grain of the wood through his skin. Still here. Still solid. Then he stood. The bathroom mirror was not kind, but Eddie had long since made his peace with it. The face that looked back at him was the face of a man who had spent 67 years doing things outdoors. Skin weathered and creased at the corners of the eyes, the jaw softened with age, the hair gone the color of ash and iron. He ran cold water over his hands and pressed them against his cheeks. And for a moment his reflection looked startled, as if surprised by the contact. He dressed in the dark out of habit, not necessity. Thermal underlayer first. The mornings had a bite to them now. Even in late spring, the kind of chill that settled in the joints and reminded you of things you'd rather not be reminded of. Then the fleece. Then the padded jacket the color of dark olive, slightly frayed at the left cuff, where he'd caught it once on the chain guard of the bike. He'd meant to sew it up. He hadn't. Downstairs, the kitchen was the first room to come alive. He put the kettle on and stood at the window with his arms folded while it heated, looking out at the back garden, or what he could make of it in the dark. The outline of the old apple tree, leafless for another few weeks. Yet, its branches held up against the sky like a question no one had ever answered. The fence posts. The patch of earth where he'd once grown courgettes and runner beans, and had, for several years, genuinely believed he might become the kind of man who grew his own vegetables. He drank his tea standing up. 2 sugars. A small splash of milk. He did not sit down for tea in the mornings. This was another thing he had never explained to anyone. But the reasoning, had he tried to put it into words, was simple. Sitting down meant you were settling in. And settling in meant the morning was already half gone, before it had properly started. He rinsed the mug and set it upside down on the drainer. Then he went to fetch his bike. It lived in the narrow passage between the side of the house and the garden wall, a space just wide enough for a man and a bicycle, with room left over for a terracotta pot of dead lavender that he kept meaning to replant. The bike was not new. It was not particularly old, either, in the way that antiques are old, with a kind of dignity attached to their age. It was just a bike that had been used a great deal. The paint on the top tube had faded to a soft blue-gray, and the mudguards rattled slightly on rough ground, and the rear pannier rack had been repaired twice with a brace. He'd fashioned himself from a length of flat steel bar and 2 bolts he'd found in a kitchen drawer. He had been offered a new one. His daughter Freya had suggested it last Christmas, in the careful tone she used when she was trying not to sound like she was suggesting something. He had said he'd think about it. He hadn't thought about it. He checked the tires with his thumbs still firm and wheeled the bike out through the side gate onto the pavement. The street was empty and orange and very quiet. A fox stood at the far end, half in the shadow of a hedge, and regarded him with calm amber eyes, before turning and disappearing without hurry, as if it had somewhere better to be. Eddie clipped on his front light and pushed off. The first pedal stroke was always the hardest. Not because of any pain, though his left knee had begun, in the past year or so, to offer its complaints on cold mornings, a dull insistent ache that he treated with the same policy he applied to most things: acknowledgement, then disregard. No, the hardness of that first stroke was something else. It was the moment before becoming, the pause between intention and motion. The second stroke was easier. The third easier still. By the time he reached the end of the road, he was moving. The streets at this hour belonged to no one and everyone. He passed a man walking a terrier, both of them looking thoughtfully at the ground. He passed a woman in scrubs emerging from a terraced house, car keys in hand, a travel mug pressed to her chest like something valuable. The traffic lights on the high street cycled through their sequence for no one in particular. Red, amber, green, amber, red, performing their duty, regardless of audience, which Eddie had always found quietly admirable. He turned left at the church and felt the road tilt gently downward, and without thinking, he stopped pedaling and let the bike carry him, the cold air pressing against his face, filling his eyes with water. He blinked it away. The bakery was 4 streets further on, set back slightly from the road, its windows already warm and lit from inside. He could smell it from 100 meters away. Yeast, and something darker underneath caramelized crusts. The faint sweetness of a day that hadn't begun yet for anyone else, but was already, in this small building, well underway. He leaned the bike against the wall and pushed open the back door. Chapter 2. The bakery at 5 in the morning. The man behind the proofing rack was Julian, who was 24 years old, and already losing his hair and pretended not to mind about it. He was sliding trays with practiced ease, and he nodded at Eddie, without speaking, the way people nod at things that are expected, that are part of the ordinary fabric of the morning. "The sourdoughs are ready," Julian said, without turning around. "Emilia did them last night. They came out well. They always come out well. She'll want you to say that to her face. She's not here yet. She'll be in by 6. You can wait." Eddie didn't wait. He pulled on a pair of thin gloves and began to load the panniers. This was the part he had once tried to explain to Freya when she had asked, as she occasionally did, with careful gentleness, why he still did this, at his age, for the money it paid. Which was not very much. He had tried several answers. I like being useful. True, but incomplete. I like the mornings. Also true, but it made him sound like someone who'd read too many books about mindfulness, which he had not. In the end he'd said, I'd just be sitting at home otherwise. Which was the kind of answer that closed a conversation rather than opening it. And he knew it, and he'd let it close. What he had not said, what he could not quite organize into words, even for himself, was something about the bread. There was a particular weight to a fresh loaf. Not heavy, not light, just present, the way a living thing is present. When you picked one up, still warm, you could feel the last of the heat in your palms. You could smell the crust up close, that complex, almost meaty smell that had nothing to do with meat. That was purely itself, purely bread. And when you set it down at someone's door, easing it into the bag on the hook, or placing it on the step, or handing it through a barely opened door to someone in a dressing gown, who said ta or thanks or nothing at all, there was a completeness to the action that he found, each morning, quietly astonishing. He finished loading the panniers. 12 loaves on the left, 8 on the right, and a cloth bag over his shoulder. With another 6 for the customers on Wren Street who preferred handover. Julian was still at the proofing rack. You want tea before you go? I had one. That was an hour ago. I'm not made of tea, Julian. Julian looked at him sideways. He was smiling slightly, which was his default expression for people he liked. Emilia says you drink it like you're paying a debt. What does that mean? I don't know. She says a lot of things. Eddie lifted the pannier bags onto the bike, and adjusted the balance until it felt right. A loaded bike felt different to an empty one, heavier in the back. More deliberate, as if the weight gave it purpose. He preferred it this way. See you in 2 hours, Julian said. Maybe less. He pushed off again into the dark. The first delivery was always to the house on Caldwell Terrace. A narrow Victorian semi whose occupant, a woman named Jade, worked from home doing something with databases that Eddie did not fully understand, and had never asked her to explain. She was almost always awake when he arrived. He could see the glow of a monitor through the front curtains. Though she never came to the door at this hour. The bread went into the cloth bag on the hook beside the letterbox, which she had installed specifically for this purpose, and which he had always found deeply touching, though he had never told her so. He eased the loaf in gently, pulled the bag's drawstring closed, moved on. The route was the same every morning, and this sameness was something he had grown to understand differently over the years. When he'd first taken the job 7 years ago now, after his wife Danielle had died and the house had become a place that needed leaving every day before it swallowed him, the sameness had been a comfort in a raw and simple way. Like a bandage. Something to hold him in his shape while he learned to exist in a world that had reorganized itself without his consent. Now it was something else. Not comfort exactly. More like a record. A daily accounting. This is still here. This has not changed. You have passed this garden wall, this lamppost, this dog that always barks from behind the gate on Merchant Street. 4,000 and something times, and you are here again, and so is the wall, and so is the lamppost, and so is the dog. The dog barked. Morning, Eddie said, which he always said, and which never made any difference, and which he said anyway. Chapter 3. The weight of small things. By the time he reached Wren Street, the sky had begun to change. It was not yet light, not properly, not the kind of light that meant daylight had arrived and the city could get on with itself. It was the color between, the slow blue-gray dissolution of night, the sky quietly negotiating its terms. The street lamps were still on but beginning to look unnecessary, like something you'd forgotten to put away. In the east, above the roofline of a converted mill building, there was the faintest, most tentative suggestion of pink. Eddie stopped pedaling and looked at it for a moment. He did this most mornings. Sometimes he forgot, or the weather was too gray to bother, or he was running behind and didn't allow himself to stop. But when he remembered, he always felt that looking at the dawn for 30 seconds was a kind of small, private act of resistance against nothing in particular. Against hurry, perhaps. Against the assumption that the sky was just a thing above you. His breath came out in a short plume of white. The first house on Wren Street was old Mr. Finn's, though everyone called him that Mr. Finn, an 83-year-old retired electrician, who lived alone with a great deal of Radio 4 and a cat named either Percy or Percy, depending on who you asked. Mr. Finn had told Eddie once, during a rare and apparently accidental moment of candor, that the bread was the first thing he touched every morning that had come from somewhere other than his own four walls. Eddie had nodded slowly and hadn't said anything, and Mr. Finn had seemed relieved not to have to elaborate. This morning, unusually, the door opened before Eddie could reach the step. Mr. Finn stood in the doorway in his dressing gown, a dark blue one that had seen better years. Its cord held in a loose knot that looked like it might not survive the day. He was taller than Eddie, though he had thinned with age into something that looked somewhat provisional, as if he might be reconsidering the whole arrangement. "You're early," Mr. Finn said. "Same time as always." He looked past Eddie at the street, at the pale sky, at nothing in particular. The cat was making a fuss. Wouldn't settle. Eddie held out the loaf. Mr. Finn took it with both hands, turned it once, pressed his thumb lightly against the base, testing the crust, the way people do when they know bread, and seemed satisfied. "Come in for a minute," he said. "I've got the kettle on." Eddie almost said no. He had said no before, many times, to many people, because the route had a rhythm and tea took 12 minutes at minimum. And the bread would cool and there were still 11 households to go. But this morning something in the quality of the light, or the way Mr. Finn was holding the loaf, with that particular two-handed care, as if it were something that might be lost, he said, 5 minutes. The hallway smelled of old wood and the kind of cleaning product that hadn't been fashionable since the 70s. And underneath that, very faintly, something else not quite unpleasant. Just the smell of a house where one person has lived for a very long time. The cat appeared from somewhere, regarded Eddie with the same unrevealing amber gaze as the fox at the end of his street that morning, and disappeared again. In the kitchen, Mr. Finn poured tea without asking how he took it and handed him the mug. Eddie noted that it was black, no sugar, which was not how he took it, but he said nothing and drank it anyway. "Do you remember," Mr. Finn said, with no preamble, "when all of this was different?" "All of what?" A vague gesture. "The mornings. Being out at this hour. Having somewhere to be." Eddie looked at him. "I still have somewhere to be." "Yes." Mr. Finn settled into a chair at the kitchen table, the loaf resting on the surface in front of him. "That's why you're still doing it, isn't it?" It was not a question, exactly. Eddie held the mug with both hands and felt its warmth against his palms. A different warmth to bread, the warmth of water that had been heated. Not the warmth of something living, and thought about how to answer. "My daughter thinks I should slow down," he said. This was not an answer to the question, but it was the closest thing he had. Mr. Finn nodded. "Mine too. All three of them. They take it in turns." He looked at the loaf. "They don't understand that slowing down isn't the same as resting. It's a very different thing." The kitchen was quiet. The radio was off for once. Through the window above the sink, the sky had shifted another degree toward morning. "I'd better go," Eddie said. "Yes." Mr. Finn didn't move. "Same time tomorrow?" "Same time." He left the mug on the counter and let himself out. Chapter 4. The road in both directions. There was a hill on the back of the route that Eddie had, for reasons he couldn't entirely justify, always saved until last. It wasn't a dramatic hill. In any other context, hiking, for instance, or driving, you might not register it as a hill at all, just a long, steady inclination that went on for about 400 meters before leveling off. But on a bicycle, in the morning, with a body that had now been in service for 67 years and still had opinions about certain gradients, it was a hill. He had, for a time in his early 60s, made a private competition of it. How high up the slope before he needed to shift down a gear? Could he make it all the way without dropping to the small ring at the front? He had kept an unofficial record. Not today. Too wet and cold. Yes, today. Felt strong close, but no, until one morning he had caught himself doing it and felt something that was not quite embarrassment, but was adjacent to it. As if he'd been observed taking himself too seriously. He had stopped keeping the record, but the knowledge persisted. The way these things do. Can I still? Today was a good morning for it. The air was cold and still no headwind, which made a significant difference, and his legs had warmed properly into the ride, the left knee grumbling but cooperative. He shifted up a gear at the base of the slope, settled his weight forward slightly, and breathed. The thing about a hill, he had decided, was that it asked you a question that had no neutral answer. You answered it either with effort or with capitulation. There was no third option. And the question was not only can you but also will you, which was, he understood now, always the more important of the two. His breathing deepened. The bike slowed. He held the gear. Halfway up, he was aware of the familiar sensation of his heart working harder, sending its signals through his chest and arms, the pulse of it audible in his own ears. He thought sometimes about what a cardiologist would say if they could see him at this moment. A man approaching 70, alone on a loaded bicycle, climbing a hill before 6 in the morning. He suspected the answer would be a complicated mix of approval and alarm, and he found this perfectly reasonable. 3/4 up. The muscles in his thighs had passed through the first stage of complaint and into the quieter stage. Beyond, where effort becomes less about force and more about patience. One pedal stroke, then another. He did not look at the top, this was crucial. He had learned looking at the top made it farther away, but kept his eyes on the road surface immediately ahead of him, the wet asphalt, the white line at the edge, a single leaf plastered flat against the tarmac. And then without ceremony, without any clear moment of arrival, the slope eased. He rode the crest for a few meters, letting his breathing slow, not quite ready to celebrate and not quite not celebrating either. The road ran downhill before him, long and pale and empty, the houses on either side still shuttered and sleeping. At the bottom, past the junction, he could see the first suggestion of the morning's real light beginning to spread itself across the city, not dramatic. Nothing like sunrise in paintings, just a gradual brightening, the world reluctantly revealing itself. He freewheeled. The speed came gently at first, then with more conviction. And the cold rushed against his face and made his eyes sting again, and he let them sting, didn't squint against it. Because there was something important about keeping your eyes open to the rush of a thing. Something about witness, about being present for whatever the morning chose to offer. He passed the bottom of the hill and eased through the junction and began the last stretch back toward the bakery. The panniers lighter now, the bike handling differently without the weight. Lighter, yes. And also this was the thing he could not explain, the thing that would sound wrong if he said it out loud, somehow also emptier. As if the bread had been a kind of company, and delivering it was not only a task completed, but a particular form of presence, distributed across the morning in 20 small installments. He was thinking about this, about company, about presence, about the particular grammar of leaving things at people's doors when he noticed the boy. He was sitting on the low wall in front of the newsagent's on the corner of Prior Street, which was not yet open. He was perhaps 12 or 13, in a school uniform that seemed to be taking its time transitioning from winter weight to spring. And he was eating a packet of crisps at an hour when no child should be eating crisps. And he was watching Eddie approach with the frank curiosity that children sometimes have and adults almost never do. Eddie slowed without quite stopping, the way you do when you're considering something. "You're out early," Eddie said. This was, he recognized, the second time he had said this to someone this morning, which probably said something about the hour. The boy shrugged. "Couldn't sleep." "Where do you live?" A gesture vague, down the road somewhere, a direction rather than an answer. "You cycle every morning?" the boy asked. "Every morning." The boy seemed to be processing this. He crunched a crisp. "What for?" And here it was again. The question, what for? The question his daughter asked gently, the question Julian didn't ask, the question Mr. Finn had this morning answered for him without asking it at all. Eddie looked at the boy and then looked at the road ahead and then looked back at the boy. "Because it's morning," he said finally. The boy considered this with the seriousness of someone who was not going to let it go but also was not quite ready to push it further. "That's not really a reason," he said. "No," Eddie agreed. "Not really." He pushed off. In his mirror, a small, slightly scratched convex mirror mounted on his right handlebar, picked up at a car boot sale 3 years ago. He could see the boy watching him go. After a moment, the boy raised one hand. Eddie raised one hand back. He pedaled on. Chapter 5. The Return. The bakery was warmer than it had been 2 hours earlier. Amelia was there now, as Julian had predicted, standing at the counter with a coffee, reviewing something on a clipboard. Her dark hair tied back in a way that always looked as though it had been done in 10 seconds and would survive a hurricane. She was in her late 30s, efficient and observant in equal measure, and she had been running the bakery for 4 years. With a combination of genuine skill and the particular stubbornness of someone who had been underestimated. Often enough to take a private pleasure in proving people wrong. She looked up when Eddie came through the back door. "All done?" "All done." "How were the sourdoughs?" "Julian told me to tell you they were excellent." "Julian tells everyone everything is excellent." He was right this time. She made a small, satisfied sound and returned to her clipboard. Eddie hung up his jacket and began unloading the empty pannier bags. Folding them with the automatic care of someone who has done a thing so many times it has become a small ritual in itself. "You had a good one this morning?" Amelia said. She was still looking at the clipboard. But this was her way. She conducted a lot of conversations while appearing to be doing something else. He thought about the fox. Mr. Finn in his kitchen. The boy on the wall. The hill and the freewheeling and the sting of cold air. "Yes," he said. "Good morning." She nodded. "I've got a new loaf I want you to try. Spelt and rye, bit of honey in it. Not on the route yet, I'm still working on the proof time." "What does it taste like?" "Right now it tastes like a good idea with some technical problems." He smiled. She cut him a slice without ceremony, thick, slightly uneven, still warm, the crust. Making that particular sound when the knife went through it. A sound that was somehow both sharp and soft at once, like an old door opening. She set it on the counter and pushed a small dish of butter toward him. He ate it standing up, at the counter, the way he drank his morning tea. It was very good, the honey coming through lightly, not sweet exactly, more like the idea of sweetness, the rye. Giving it a weight that kept it from being merely pleasant. He said so. Amelia wrote something on her clipboard, which might have been about the bread, or might not have been. Julian came through from the back with a tray of morning rolls, set them down, and said, "You made the hill today? How do you know about the hill? You always look different when you've made the hill." "Different how?" Julian thought about it. "Satisfied," he said, but quietly. He cycled home in the full light. This was the other half of the morning, the return, when the city had woken around him and the route back was nothing like the route out. Cars now, and a few school runs beginning, and a woman walking 2 dogs who pulled in opposite directions with complete commitment, and a bin lorry moving slowly along Caldwell Terrace in the opposite direction to his usual flow. The light was flat and white and northern and unremarkable. Which was to say, it was the light you actually lived in, as opposed to the light of dawns and particular moments. He rode at an easy pace. The bike without the panniers felt almost weightless, a little uncertain, like a sentence that has been cleared of most of its meaning. He was tired in the way he was always tired after the route, a satisfying tiredness. The tiredness of having been somewhere and done something and returned, the body's mild accounting at the end of an effort. His left knee had quieted itself, the way it always did once the blood was properly moving. He could feel the warmth of the bakery still in his hands. He thought, as he sometimes allowed himself to, about Danielle. Not with grief, or not only with grief, not anymore, not after 9 years. More with a kind of wondering. She had always been asleep when he set out, in the years when they had both been alive and living together, and the ordinary morning had been ordinary. She would surface briefly when he rose a movement. A questioning sound, and he would say just going for a ride, which was not technically the same as going to deliver bread, but which had seemed to satisfy her, and she would sink back, and he would go. She had never, in all their years together, seen him on the bike at that hour. He found this remarkable now. The thing that he was, at 5 in the morning, on the road. She had known it existed but had never witnessed it. And he had known things about her, too, that he had never witnessed. The things she was when he was not there. This was what it meant to share a life with someone, the vast and ordinary privacy of the parts the other person didn't see. And somehow the knowing that those parts existed was enough. Was more than enough. Was, he thought now, the whole thing. He turned onto his street. The apple tree in the back garden was visible above the fence line, and in the week since he'd last truly looked at it, something had happened. Buds, tight and small and pale green, clustered at the ends of the branches that he'd thought were done for winter. And maybe for good. He slowed the bike to look at them. He had planted that tree 22 years ago. Danielle had said it would take too long to fruit. He had said all trees take too long to fruit, that's the nature of trees, and she had said that was exactly her point, and they had both been right. It had fruited the following year, small and tart and superb. He leaned the bike against the side wall and stood looking at the buds for a moment. The morning was making its adjustments around him. A neighbor's door, opening and closing, the sound of a radio briefly audible, a gull making its improbable presence known 2 miles from the sea. He could smell, very faintly, his own jacket, the cool air smell, and underneath it the warm compound of the bakery, flour and caramel and yeast, which had settled into the fabric over years and would not, he imagined, come out entirely even if he tried. He did not try. Inside, he washed his hands at the kitchen sink and looked out the window while the water ran. The garden, the tree, the small green facts of April. He dried his hands on the tea towel, the one with the map of the Lake District on it that Freya had given him 3 Christmases ago. Slightly faded now from washing, and put the kettle on. 2 sugars. A small splash of milk. He stood at the window with the mug in both hands and felt the heat come through into his palms, and thought about nothing in particular for a long while. About the road, about the fox, about the pink along the eastern roofline, about Mr. Finn's hands on the loaf, about the boy on the wall who had watched him go, about the hill and the long freewheel down, about Amelia's new bread, with its quiet honey and its unresolved proofing, about the weight of 20 loaves against the weight of an empty pannier, about morning after morning after morning. Each one the same and none of them the same. The clock on the kitchen wall said 822. He had been out for 3 hours and 35 minutes. He had, in that time, covered 12 miles and left 20 portions of warmth at 20 different doors. and climbed one hill and spoken to 3 people and watched the sky change from black to gray to the ordinary working light of a Tuesday in April. He had felt his knee object and be overruled. He had drunk 2 cups of tea he hadn't fully wanted and eaten 1 slice of bread that he had wanted very much. He had thought about his wife, and had not been destroyed by it, which had not always been true and which he no longer took for granted. He was tired in his legs and awake in his mind and hungry enough to make toast. He was 67 years old. He put the bread in the toaster, a seeded loaf from the bakery, 2 days old now, still good, and listened to it tick and warm, and thought about tomorrow morning, the alarm he didn't need, the floor beneath his feet. The first difficult pedal stroke and the easier ones that followed. Not yet, he thought. Not yet. The toast came up with its small domestic sound. He ate it at the window, standing up, in the pale spring light.